Today we're talking about successful donor stewardship, which is we sort of think of as the most important thing that people don't talk about enough. So we'll talk about this for planned giving, we'll talk about this for major giving, and understand a little bit more around not just how do we get bigger gifts from the same donors, but how do we get more and more gifts from the same folks. You know, the folks that gave you gifts last year are your number one prospects, and yet sometimes we don't pay enough attention to those people. So we'll talk about some very specific tactics as to what we might do there. As usual, and if you're joining us for the first time, this might be news to you. This session is approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. So this is professional certification that many of you have. There is a survey that we'll sort of post in the chat at the end. Keep an eye on that. And we'll certify your participation that way. So in case you get audited, we will then sort of be able to back you up for all of the things. If you are not audited, you don't have to email us to say, you know, give me my certification or whatever. We just have sort of databases of attendees for these things. And if you do get audited, we'll just make sure that you have some backup there as well. So that happens about once every 3 weeks. Someone emails us and says, hey, I got audited. Can you confirm that I worked or that I came to these 5 sessions? And we say, yes, you did. And it's a pretty simple process. All right, so agendas today, we'll do some quick intros. We'll talk about how your week is going. We'll talk about why stewardship matters and some of the data-driven approach. Some of you will know this, but you'll want to be able to carry these things to your boss and to your board. We'll talk about some key trends impacting stewardship. We'll talk about what different nonprofits are doing based on these trends. We have a very short case study from our dear friends in the American Heart Association, and then we'll talk through some next steps and Q&A. As usual, also, the recordings and the slides will be sent around after the fact. So you can furiously take notes if that's how you learn best, but if not, don't feel any pressure. We'll make sure that you get this after the fact. All right, so introductions. So my name is Patrick Schmitt. I am one of 2 co-founders and co-CEOs of FreeWill, alongside my co-founder Jenny, who is just wonderful. And overall, we're part of a really great team. So the FreeWill team is just a group of really wonderful, lovely individuals. We're about 90 people now. And actually, as of this morning, we didn't update the slides in time, but we crossed $2.8 billion in total giving. So really exciting stuff there. We focus on bequests and QCDs and stocks and get to work alongside a lot of people on this call as well. And it's a joy. So before we get started, one thing that we like to do sometimes is give away some of our favorite books to people that join. So first of all, I will say that I haven't read this book, but it is the thing that I'm buying for as many people as I possibly can at this point. So the book is called Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues. This is incredibly apropos for our stewardship conversation. The reason I'm so high on this book, it's by David Bradford and Carol Robin. Both of these are very well-known professors at Stanford Business School, which is where I went and actually met my co-founder Jenny there, and that's sort of the origin story of FreeWill. It is based on a class called Interpersonal Dynamics. Interpersonal Dynamics is the single most popular class at Stanford Business School. Everyone takes it. You sort of think about all these hardcore folks coming with finance backgrounds or consulting backgrounds, et cetera. And it's all about human relationships. We actually nickname it touchy-feely at the school. So, you'd say, oh, well, when are you taking touchy-feely? What section are you in, et cetera. And so it's widely known. It's been going on for at least a decade, maybe 2. So everyone who's ever been through the school has taken this class. And there's a bunch of specific language and really great attributes around how to connect with people. And it's actually really, frankly, I think shaped a lot of my friendships, my relationships with my sort of immediate family, romantic relationships, et cetera. So yes, it will be helpful for donors. I hope it's helpful for you in your professional work, but also I hope it's helpful to you in your life, which is a lot more than your job. So make a note in the survey. We'll send this to 20 random folks. But also, if you don't get it, just buy it. It's probably $15, maybe $20. But it's the training that we got there, I think, has just done wonders for us. And so we're really grateful for it. So I'm proud to support Carol and David, and hopefully it will help you as well. So really cool. And then also, if you read it and hate it, let me know. Be curious to get any feedback on it as well. Okay, so how is your week going? Well, look at this. The folks that noted themselves being happy this week is as high as it's ever been. Really exciting. Check out this yellow line. This is anxious, and it's as low as it's been in more than a year since we first ran a survey on March 13th of 2020. You guys can remember what was happening that week. So pretty big shifts. Loneliness is all the way down. That's not surprising. People feeling eager is a bit up, And so really good news overall. Really exciting and glad to see so many folks are feeling good about things. So I hope this makes you feel a little bit better, but either way, it's really great to see this. We also ask people what they're worried about. And what you can see here is hitting goals is the top concern. Now, in fairness, the way this is calculated is that you have to pick something. So you can't say I'm not worried about anything. So the idea that it's going up is a little bit that a lot of these other things are going down. So people are less worried about coworkers' health and safety, et cetera. That is as low as it's been. Donors' health and safety as low as it's been. So pretty cool. All right, so that's how you guys are doing. Let's talk about why stewardship matters and some of the data behind it. Well, first we asked you, what are some words that you used when you think about stewardship? My colleague Simone put this together, and I love this. You can see the really big stuff. It's fun, right? I didn't expect to see this big. It's vital. It's a relationship. It's gratitude. It's impact. It's care. It's connection. It's a thank you. It's important. It's engaging. It's personal, crucial, necessary, etc. I mean, this is sort of the most positive we've seen of all of these sessions. And so really cool stuff and sort of helpful to think through as we define this. What does it mean? And we'll give a definition. You may have your own definition of stewardship, but just so we can work along sort of the same lines as we go forward here. So stewardship is the relationship based process after a donor has already made a gift. So yes, there are other avenues here, but specifically we're going to talk about what happens after someone gives, the first time or the second time or the 10th time. In this webinar, we'll talk about stewarding folks for plan giving, bequests, let's get this back up to full screen, and for major gifts, such as large cash gifts, IRA gifts, etc. So there is a lot of stewardship for annual donors. We are not talking about that here, and that will be really useful as well. So why does this matter? Well, as you can probably imagine, it costs far more to acquire new donors than to retain them. And on average, recurring donors are giving significantly more, 42% more than one-time donors. So it's not as though a new donor and a returning donor are the same thing. Returning donors are actually quite a bit more valuable the second time. And what else we see is that if we can get donors to give again, they're much more likely to give a third, a fourth, and a fifth time. So this second donation is worth 42% more initially, but it's probably worth 200% more or 300% more because you're getting subsequent gifts overall. So really, really exciting. This means that more gifts and more money for your organization, typically also with less cost. So we often talk about how big is a gift without thinking of how much money or time or focus did it take to get there. And sometimes you get a big gift, but boy, it took almost all of that gift to make it. And what we see is in subsequent gifts, it actually tends to be lower effort. Now you still have to do it, but they're quite a bit more valuable because the net is a lot higher. So what does this mean for things like plan giving? Well, one thing we've seen is that if you actually steward your plan giving donors effectively, research shows that this will increase annual giving. By annual, we just mean real time, doesn't mean small, by 75%. And so a ton of work is going to these major donor relationships. How might we use them to get bigger gifts from the same people instead of constantly going out and just recycling new donors as well? So when we asked you all, what percentage of your major donors make a second major gift or a planned gift? Now, a bunch of folks don't know. And partly it's not that no one in your organization knows, but you don't know, so that's okay. But look at this. I mean, I think, a very small component of none. It'd be very surprising if that was high. But 27%, at least a quarter, or only a quarter, are making a second major gift. I mean, that's a real net loss here. 26 to 50%, 13%. 51 to 75%, only 12.5%. And then only 9% of you said, boy, more than 3 and 4 are making a second gift. So these are people, remember, we've already established that they really care about your organization and they're high capacity. And yet for the most part, we're not getting subsequent gifts there. And so this is an enormous opportunity that we'll talk about. So what are some of the big trends affecting stewardship right now? How is this different in 2021 compared to 2020 or 2019 or 2016 or 2005? And one big thing is that we're seeing that actually events are returning, and actually potentially even faster than we would have thought. So when we last held a stewardship webinar, it was about a little less than a year ago, and events were totally off. I mean, there was no way you were holding a party in August of 2020. But now more than 55% of American adults have received at least one COVID vaccine dose. I know some of you are in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. they're signaling, those states considerably, that in May, you're going to get moved to full reopening of most businesses. The best estimates for in-person events in the summer is 90% likely in late summer and fall. So these are very, very likely to happen. Things could happen. You know, the world obviously tends to be unpredictable, but for the most part, these are likely to be returning. So these events are back on. One of the big avenues is you can use these to welcome new donors to your organization and to really shape the experience for VIPs. So one of the things that we've talked about in the past, but it's really important because my guess is that a lot of this planning is happening right now, or it's happening next week or next month. And so your new era, in a big way, you can market with your sort of first event, even if it's not your first, even if the museum has been sort of open at limited capacity, you know, naming, we are going to have a big welcome back party and we'd like you to be there. You know, you are a really important person and this is a really big moment for the museum and we'd really love for you to be there. I mean, this is a really powerful stewardship opportunity. So this idea of the first, that we're adding significance to this event, it's not a luncheon, right? It is a big welcome back reopening. And we want to celebrate with the people that are most important to the museum, and that's you, right? You can tell how that sort of language is going to shift the mindset of how I am viewed by the museum, or by the school, or even by the land trust. So that's one. The big second trend here, and this is interesting. No one has done this on purpose, but there's a significant rise in unintentional anonymous giving. So in the last 2 years, and we've talked about this before, qualified charitable distributions, these are gifts from IRAs, they've grown by 3x. They are the fastest growing type of gift in the United States. But 44% of nonprofits say that a lack of donor information is one of their biggest challenges around QCDs. So these are gifts coming out of an IRA, and you'll just get a $12,000 check or a $100,000 check from Fidelity or Vanguard. And that's just going to be a check. And it has your name on it, meaning your organization. And what happens? Well, we don't know who it came from. We actually don't know what they wanted to do with the money. So if you're a hospital or a college and you've got, you know, some colleges have 1,000 places you can give, literally 1,000, and yet we don't know how to get that to the right place. And these folks aren't including information on checks, and so you can't thank donors, you can't steward them, you can't get them the right acknowledgement. Huge challenge. Gifts from donor advised funds are rising nearly 20% a year. Many of you have had a big experience there. And so what does that mean? Well, the problem is that 15 to 20% of these gifts come without donor information as well. So, you know, same challenges. Donors go unthanked. They don't receive the right tax acknowledgements. Now, you don't really need a tax receipt from donor advised fund, but you do need some acknowledgement that it's coming. And then they become angry and disillusioned. I mean, just put yourself in the donor's shoes for a second. So there's a ballet in your town. You love the ballet. You're a regular donor. You've decided with your spouse that, boy, this year we're going to go big. We're going to give a $20,000 check, a $20,000 gift out of a donor advised fund or out of a QCD. We've never made a gift larger than $2,000, but honestly, it's a really big part of our existence. And then what happens? Crickets, right? So suddenly you think, oh my God, I just put myself out there. I really feel a connection with this organization. And then you make this huge gift and nothing. No one acknowledges. The next time you go to the ballet, no one sort of shakes your hand or says anything. That's a terrible experience. And yet it's becoming increasingly common. It's also very common, by the way, with stock donors, just before we get off this topic. So brokers don't send over donor information. So again, can't thank people, this stock, it's very, very important to get the right tax information. And we can't direct you to the place they want to go. And so, is that couple going to give to the ballet again? Probably not, or certainly not that amount. Now, what else is happening? Well, when it comes to bequests, which we have a bunch of data on as FreeWill, there are some groups that are more likely to give anonymously and some less. So higher asset individuals tend to do it. Older generations, such as baby boomers and silent generation. Men, a little bit more than women. And then these donors might also give the biggest gifts. So we'll talk about how to solve anonymity in the next section. So this is what it actually looks like as a generation breakdown. So what you can tell is basically a little bit of, Gen Z, millennials. Millennials, by the way, are sort of younger millennials, Oregon Trail millennials. We talked about this in a whole other session. These are sort of the older millennials. Think about 1981 to say 1987. They're named because they basically all got the internet at the same time and had sort of a very shared childhood experience, which included playing Oregon Trail when there were only like a dozen video games that people played. Gen X, boomers, etc. And so you see more comfort with information sharing at younger generations, and that's not surprising. You also see it shift a little bit based on anonymity and giving by cause area. So what you can see is things like family and foster care, community and leadership, environmental as getting the fewest anonymous gifts, and humanitarian and housing and social and health get the largest. Some of this is the national organizations tend to get more anonymous gifts than the local organizations because they don't actually they might have a really strong connection to the cause, but they may not know anyone at the Leukemia Foundation or something else, right? So they really care about curing the illness, but they don't have a one-to-one relationship, whereas in a community, you're more likely to do it. And then the fourth big trend here is sort of massive growth in planned and major gift opportunities. So this is the map of bequests by months on FreeWill. This is the data that we have access to. You can also see sort of massive trends towards estate planning across the field. So things like, how to make a will, how to make an estate plan. These searches on Google are higher than they've ever been for Google. And so huge numbers of new planned giving donors are coming into different organizations. And now this question of what do we do about them is pretty existential. And then trend 5, and this is really important. This is sort of what's happening right now. I saw my parents recently for the very first time in maybe 8 or 9 months because they're finally double vaccinated and everything else. And they were saying, I was like, how are you guys? They're like, oh, we're so busy right now. Like we used to be not busy at all for a very long period of time. And we went on our walks every day and we had the same pattern every day. And suddenly, boy, like things have just picked up and it's a little bit overwhelming compared. And so that's not unusual. Over the past year, attention has been almost limitless. You can send anything and people are going to pay a lot of attention to it. But coming this summer, this fall, even right now, attention is much scarcer. So people are spending less time at home. You're spending a lot less time on computers. Travel has picked up. Restaurants are getting busier, et cetera. And so suddenly the sort of fight for attention among your donors is getting tougher than it was 4 months ago when we sort of had it easy, at least in this department. So those are some of the big trends shaping donor behavior, nonprofit behavior right now. And we can talk about now what to do about them. So a couple of things here. So one is on your ways to give page, on your giving sites, there needs to be a real focus in this process on uncovering anonymous donors. Because remember, these donors don't know that they're going to be anonymous for most cases. So they're not attempting to be. They expect that Fidelity or Vanguard or Schwab or whomever will pass on the information. And then when they don't blame Fidelity, they blame you. And so how do we fix that? The best thing you can do is not have anonymous donors to begin with. So for stocks and QCDs and bequests and donor advised funds, you want to collect donor information as part of the process as you reveal how to give here. So for instance, if you have stock transfer instructions, meaning what is the routing information that I need to give a gift to the Red Cross or to the local land trust, you want to make sure that we're filling out some basic information before that information is revealed. Now we know, okay, we know if 200 shares of Tesla come, well, it's probably coming from Donald, right? Donald is the person who sent that. So we can follow up with him and say, just to confirm you made this gift, right? Thank you so much for being so generous. We'd love to honor you this way. We'd love to build more relationship. And then Donald will be giving a couple more times. It's also the case that sometimes, as you can imagine, life gets busy. And so people start a gift and don't finish it. And if you don't have this information, you have no idea that Lisa was trying to get these types of gifts through and then sort of got distracted because life happens. And so it is a really key shift that a lot of organizations are making here, which is having this sort of small gating mechanism where you ask for a bunch of info before revealing the transfer instructions for it. This is also really key. Sometimes people say, just email Sarah at our front desk to get the transfer instructions. But if you're a millennial or if you're a Gen X or you're a boomer and you're working, and so, okay, finally I'm getting around to 9:30 at night, well, we're not getting a response back at that point. And so, I might maybe make the gift tomorrow when I hear about it or the following, but again, life happens and we get sort of distracted. So you don't want to have too much of a delay there either. To uncover anonymous donors, you want to make it really easy to find gift notification forms on your website. Consider placing a link, this is really important, on your most trafficked pages. So things like donates and homepage, these pages are going to get so much more traffic than a typical, ways to give. And sometimes people say, oh, we have a whole version of giving stock, but it takes you 7 clicks to get there, and most donors aren't going to find it. But if you put it sort of front and center, your goal is to get really big gifts. you can make sure that you're not stopping people from doing that. Here's an example for the University of Cincinnati, go Bearcats. And you can request a tax acknowledgement letter. You can do other things to notify somebody that you've made a QCD. And so this is the same as true of stocks or other things. But you want to make sure you have a way for people to tell you that they made these gifts instead of just waiting to hear back. And then when you do email outreach or you do direct mail outreach about these types of gifts, just make a little note that says, look, you might be surprised to find out that oftentimes your custodian's not going to tell us who the gift is from. So make sure you reach out. And that way it sort of saves you the feeling the wrath of that donor who's a little bit frustrated. So why would, in this process, think about giving them a reason to notify you of their gift. And one thing that we found here is that making your life easier, meaning you as a gift officer, you as a gift officer team, that is actually pretty compelling to people. So you might want to do that. You need a tax acknowledgement letter. But at FreeWill, we really have been working really hard to sort of get more people to be willing to share their information about planned gifts. And we tried 7 different tests. So those of you in planned giving will know that historically, only about 15, 20, 25% of people will tell you about a planned gift beforehand. Now, this is real trouble, right? It means 80% of folks you don't know about, you can't thank them, you can't steward them, you can't turn them into major donors, you can't actually plan for that money. And so we said, okay, great, we're going to fix this. Originally it was about 42% of folks said, okay, we'll share information. Everyone else said, I'd rather stay private. So we tried all these tests. And the last test we ran actually doubled the percentage of donors who agreed to share their info with the nonprofit. So we failed, and then we failed, and we failed, and we failed again. We continually sort of struck out in terms of figuring out how to actually move the needle here. So what did we do? This is the winning experiment. So a lot of pain and suffering went into figuring this out for you. And what we realized is saying, will you make the work of nonprofits easier by letting them know who you are? Anonymous gifts may be less helpful because they often cannot be included in planned giving goals. Now, we ran all these experiments, and this was the most successful. And why? That when you actually break it down to an individual person and say, look, this is just going to make Scott's life harder if you don't tell him. And nobody wants to make Scott's life harder, and so you can do that, right? And really connecting at a human-to-human level turns out to be the most successful thing here. So we wrote a whole article about this if you're curious about reading more, but it was really interesting to experiment, and have nothing be successful until suddenly this breakthrough after probably 4 months of trying to go at this. All right, so the other tips here is that older donors, wealthier donors, men are more likely to be anonymous, but they're also likely to be on your supporter email list, involved in your organization in some ways. And so you want to start with outreach to these groups with an easy way to notify you and a reason to do so. So just to sort of wrap this point up, that it's not always the case that the first time you ask someone, they're going to notify you. Sometimes it's going to take 2 times. Sometimes it's going to take 7 times. I mean, we have partners sometimes and say, oh, I emailed everyone, they didn't respond. And we say, hey, I remember we emailed you 3 times before you responded. And they say, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so this idea of repetition. I mean, those of you that, if you watch any sort of sporting event or major TV, you'll see a Bud Light ad every 30 minutes or so, or 60 minutes. And, everyone knows what light beer is. And yet somehow Bud Light is convinced that they're going to spend literally millions of dollars every day reminding you that you might want this thing. And so the idea that repetition is needed should be pretty obvious at this point. All right, so now how do we think about, once we have donors, we know who these folks are, what are some of the things that actually make thoughtful or more personal communication? So you're going to write an email, you're going to write a letter. What actually matters and makes it stick, with very little more work? So the first one is hearing your own name triggers greater brain activation. I think, let's say that, the average person on this call is born in the 70s. Of the people born in the 70s who are women, I think something like 1 in 17 or 1 in 18 is named Jennifer, right? So there are probably, just as some quick math, there are probably 30 Jennifers on the call. And so when I say this, that I can tell you, and if your name is Jennifer, feel free to sort of pop in and tell you whether or not this is true. So thanks, Jennifer Farmer and Jennifer Teskey, that you're sort of more perked up now than Rachel or Scott is, right? Until we just said their name as well. So this is really key. Your brain is sort of activating a little bit differently. Personalized experience also gives people a greater sense of control and reduces information overload. So Jennifer might say, this is a lot. But I would say, Jennifer, you you work at the National Audubon Society, just as a hypothetical example, and I know that you've been there a year and a half, and you probably have a couple hundred donors. Now, if all these things are true, suddenly this information becomes much more manageable. People feel like a greater sense of control, and it reduces this idea of information overload, even if we're then about to say the same thing. So, obviously addressing your donor by name, this is pretty 101. So if you don't do this already, please switch, but I'm sure that you do. Then go beyond name. So thinking through, referring back to personal information your donor has shared with you. So what's their favorite piece of art? What is their class year? What are their kids or their spouse names? You might want to set a goal of 3 specifics, meaning specific information per contact. And if these are folks that are giving you $20,000, you can definitely take the time. Send progress updates for causes they previously donated to, and name specific dates. So this is one of these things that actually, it's going to be automatically tracked in your database. So if, nice to see all the Jennifers popping into. If we say, Jennifer, you made a gift on August 18th, and I want to sort of share what that happened. Suddenly you think, wow, this person really knows me. And this is really not sort of some generic thing. But in your records, you're going to have easy access to the dates that people made gifts. And so that can be pretty useful. One of the ways to put this into practice is what we call this thinking of you note. Now, we've shared this a few times, and everyone who uses it says, wow, this has just been both incredibly impactful and super easy, which is a really good place to be. So step 1, name something specific this person helped to fund. It doesn't mean that donation had to be earmarked towards this, right? If they made a general gift to the high school, you say, look, among other things, you helped to fund this. Share something you saw in action and keep it very short. This should feel sort of spontaneous and easy. So here's what this looks like. Subject, thinking of you. Now, both this, you can always say thinking of you, comma, Scott. Everyone is going to open this email, right? You don't normally get subject lines that say thinking of you. Sean, I walked by Sam on campus today, and she was explaining a geometry concept to another student. Parentheses, I think doing a pretty good job. I know that the scholarship you and Rachel, in this case, Rachel is presumably Sean's spouse, funded is making a big difference to Sam, but I thought you'd like to know that it seems to be helping other kids too. Have a great day, Patrick. So that's it, right? This is 60 words, super easy, not very challenging. It can also be a text message. So here's an example to a hypothetical woman named Joanna. Hi, Joanna, Patrick from the Land Trust here. I thought of you today because I was out walking this morning and saw a brother and sister, maybe they were 4 and 6, just delighting in the daffodils in the new reserve we just opened. Their mom and dad seemed to love being outside, and the kids seem like they don't usually get to spend this much time among wildflowers. I know you helped to fund this expansion we did last August, right, specific dates, and I wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure you knew the joy you were making possible. Thanks for being such a generous person. Here's my favorite flower I came across today, picture, done, right? And you can imagine that this just sort of hits really hard and makes someone's day. And if you want to go meet with Joanna in a month to talk about maybe another gift, she will very likely take this meeting. And so it's really, really valuable. Pretty exciting stuff. Again, this whole thing, it probably takes a minute to type out. Quite easy. And if you got 50, 60 donors in your portfolio, over the course of a week, you can actually send one to everybody. So, Mari says, I send thinking of you emails to folks that include a photo of a place near the campus that is very important to them, where they got married, their dorm, etc. So that's a great point. If you have access to what dorm somebody stayed in or what another particular moment was, I know you were in this club, 20 years ago. Here's actually just a little photo of a flyer, against the wall, as a lot of people are participating in something similar right now. That will really hit home. So these are actually examples from you all, and I really loved going through this. There were probably 3 times as many really good ideas as we could fit in this, but I want to, take everyone for an hour and a half. So I want to share a couple of the things that folks are doing. First idea, we recently implemented a mandatory thank you call after every donation. Those that give more are called by development or management teams. Those that give less are called by our field teams. The call has no ask, just says thank you for your support. Is there anything you'd like to know about our organization, or do you have any questions I can answer? And it says we're seeing great results. So pretty exciting. Other ideas here. I call donors in the area. This is really thoughtful. That has a natural disaster to check on them, right? No agenda, nothing, right? But tornado hits Oklahoma, hurricane hits Florida, something else happens elsewhere, and you say, look, I heard about this happening, it may not be near you, but I just wanted to check, how are you doing? And you can imagine what that call feels like for folks. So hats off to whoever suggested this. Other ideas, we invite them to tour the station. This, I think, is from a public broadcasting company, and exclusive screenings of documentaries that haven't aired yet. So this is really cool, right? This feeling of exclusivity. It doesn't really cost you anything to put on, but it really hits home for donors. We also be hosting pre-opening barbecues and get-togethers. This is for a theater company with the cast and creatives of each show, to which all the major donors, 1,000 plus, will be invited. So look, you're just having a barbecue. It's pretty cheap, but this sort of intermingling and interacting as normal humans to each other is really valuable. It doesn't have to be extra fancy. There's probably not champagne and caviar at this place, but just, you get to interact with the actors one-on-one, and you're making this work possible. Someone else says, I like to send handwritten notes, and I always include pictures to emphasize the impact and spread those feel-good vibes. So the roles of pictures in your one-off notes can be really, really powerful, and will sort of create a stronger memory. A couple more ideas. I love this one. So we have a magazine, and we have our major donors vote on their cover image preferences. So you've already narrowed it down to 3 or 4 that you really like, so you're in good shape. And then having some actual input and agency there can be really useful. Since we're a school, we often incorporate personalized updates in our photos of students to relevant donors, parents, or grandparents. Meaning, say, great, Tommy's in 3rd grade right now. This is what he's learning. Thanks so much for helping support. Would you consider helping Tommy and the rest of the students by making another gift? And you can see just sort of how much better this is than sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. All right, so those are a couple of the big ideas that you shared with each other. Really, really great stuff. We'll try to keep sharing more of these over the weeks. The other big tip we have is making a stewardship matrix or a checklist. So rather than sort of making this up as you go along, you want to define your donor groups, legacy donors, stock donors. You want to outline your stewardship strategy and communication pieces for each, right? So when do these donors receive the outreach, et cetera. And this gives your donors a consistent, meaningful experience and ensure you engage them at the right time. One of the biggest challenges with stewardship is, many of you aren't going to be in the same job next year. Someone else is going to say, you're a great plan giving manager here, but we need a plan giving director, and we think you might be ready for it, right? You're a great gift officer. We need a head of major giving at the smaller nonprofit. Would you be willing to take that leap? And so you're going to leave all these donors behind, and having this sort of matrix allows an easy handoff as opposed to starting from nothing. So here's an example of what it looks like. Don't feel like you have to squint too much. We'll send this to you afterwards. But you say, great, okay, for new donors, thank you or email call within 24 hours, a welcome letter, a video update, an impact report, et cetera, holiday cards across the board. And then you just go down, your major donors, your loyal donors, your plan giving donors, and all these are going to have their own approach, at what point in time. So really, really helpful here. And so a couple other notes before we wrap up on the tips here. Too often people think of stewardship only as giving or thanking. Now, one of the challenges is that a lot of your donors are wealthy, right? And so you might send them a gift or a bottle of wine or a picnic basket, and those are thoughtful gestures, but it's likely they already have wine, and they probably have better wine than you're going to give them. And so the idea of thinking about how do you actually give them experiences they wouldn't have otherwise, and a lot of it's less sort of giving or touring or thank you, but asking. And so what does this look like in non-monetary help? Well, can you help name a new society or choosing new exhibits? Hey, we're thinking about these 3 or 4 different things. We can't promise we're gonna do what you say, but we'd love a little bit of input and to sort of understand why. Can folks write thank you notes to other supporters? This tends to be really thoughtful, especially if you ask them to share why they care so much about it, and vocalizing and verbalizing it suddenly makes it even more true. Other thoughts before I get on to this last point is, a lot of folks will really be welcome the chance to give advice to younger students or other folks. So, we're welcoming some new families into sort of these giving societies or new families to school. What's the advice you would give them? What advice would you give a new student who's joining, this college for the first time or this high school for the first time? It doesn't even have to be one-to-one communication. We're just saying, hey, we're compiling a bunch of advice from our most successful alumni. Would you mind chipping in here? Can we interview you for 20 minutes and talk about what really matters, and then share that with students? And that's built a really, really big impact. And then the last thing we'll note is that multiple recognition levels and opportunities for younger donors. So if you have a younger donor, we'll talk about this here, they're far more likely to share information with you. They're also likely to be giving on the rise. So while they may not be able to give as much money now, a $10,000 gift from a millennial is actually cause for more celebration than a $10,000 gift from a boomer. Now, why is that? Because they have years of giving ahead of them, and it's more likely that their income and their investments are going to grow compared to a boomer, right? So you might get consistently large gifts from a baby boomer who's given you, which is great news. Maybe they're going up a little bit as investments sort of take off, and then at some point they might trail down a little bit. But a millennial is probably going to give you continually larger gifts. And so stewarding them now will increase retention and bring you more larger gifts in the future. So just thinking about, when we think, don't simply divide folks based on giving size, because actually a $20,000 gift from a boomer might be less good than an $18,000 gift from a millennial. And so start to think, okay, where are people in their whole giving journeys? And because the highest potential people might not be the largest givers yet. And so I hope that makes sense. Interesting avenue to think about. And then just as a bonus, some of you have kids, and I don't have kids, but I have a niece and nephew, another niece who's going to show up in a couple of weeks, I hope, 4 different godchildren. And one of the things we sort of hear about kids is, they're always listening even when it seems like they don't. And the same is true of your donors. So sometimes, gift officers might make this sort of big, great note, and then it's not acknowledged, right? And you think, oh gosh, like nobody cares. But new plan giving donors, may have made gifts to multiple organizations, up to 12 or more. And unless you're hyper clear that you need a response, you're unlikely to get one. So even if you do, your odds may still be low. People just don't have the habit of responding to an organization. Those of you can probably think of how much direct mail did I get from travel companies, from restaurants, from hotels, from charities, from the government. How many times did I respond to that, right? And so that's, people don't have the muscle memory of responding to things from organizations. So it may take you a little while, but it's still likely to have a lasting impact. So don't give up, even though the responses might be lower than you would think, because actually it's probably par for the course. All right, so a couple of big tips there. I just wanted to quickly check and share what the American Heart Association does. So when they get it, they're a FreeWill partner, we love them. When they get new bequest donors, immediately they follow up on gifts. The faster they reach out, the more likely they are to hear back. So if you think, boy, I haven't heard back on folks, well, sometimes it's that you might have written a month after they let you know a gift happened. Then they use multiple touch points, email, phone, direct mail to confirm gifts and thank donors. And then they steward every bequest donor by adding them to a legacy society. This invites them to events, holiday cards, personal emails. Even if these folks don't go to events, the idea that you're inviting them is still really valuable. So hats off to this team. I think that they do great work and generally very thoughtful. So that's just a little bit of insight into sort of how one of the smartest teams does it. All right, so we're gonna wrap up there. We have time for a bunch of questions, but first a couple of resources. First is this book that we just love. So we'll send it out to 20 folks. Make sure to make a note in the survey, which I think is my colleague Simone is gonna post in now. Let's see if that happens. Great. So fill out that survey. And then I won't sort of go on and on about how great the book is again, but it's really great. So just make a note there, and that's where if you need to put your address in so we can send it to you. Other things we'll follow up with is this sort of template for a donor survey, the steps to make a donor stewardship plan. So if you're a smaller organization, you might just put this all to work. If you're a larger organization, you have a plan in place, it might be worth reading and say, okay, great, we have our plan, but this idea and this idea and this idea are really good, and this case study as well. So just make a note in the survey if you want to receive these. Next thing is on Thursday, May 6th, which I guess is in 2 days, my colleagues Josephine and Alyssa are awesome, and they're going to walk through a bunch of different planned and major giving tools, and also some more case studies on sort of how they get used. So if you want to join that, just make a note in the survey. And then last thing, also in the survey, if you want a one-to-one demo on the stock tool, the QCD tool, or the Bequest tool, which is collectively raised almost $3 billion, just note, and we'll sort of set you up with somebody on the team who is lovely, and you'll really enjoy your conversation with them. So make a note there. That's in the survey as well. All right, so we're going to take a 60-second break. I'm going to read. We have a whole bunch of questions, so I'm going to pick out a couple of the ones that seem like they might be most useful. Use that 60 seconds to please take the survey, and then we'll be back in just a minute and talk through some of these questions. All right, so let's get to a couple of questions here. My colleague Simone has linked the survey again in case it's useful. And there's a lot of good questions here. So I'm not going to answer all of them because I don't want to keep everyone forever, but a couple of really good stuff. The question here is, do you need to create a tax letter for both QCDs and donor advised funds? QCDs are these gifts out of IRAs. Is this handled by the financial institution? So you don't need a tax receipt the same way you might as a cash gift. What's typically useful is you want an acknowledgement letter to confirm that you received parts of the gift. Now, other people have asked similar questions here. And for these in particular, particularly donor advised funds, where you don't need tax receipts, you might say, please notify us so we can make sure that we're using the gift according to your wishes. Now, this is really important. Or other reasons to give, right? Even if you say, it's actually quite a bit easier for us to know who this is coming from so we can thank you appropriately, having that reason is really valuable. So it's correct that you won't need tax receipts for these in the same way you might if you get a $2,000 check, but still quite important. And so giving people reasons why to let you know is very valuable. Ed asks, so if I'm already using FreeWill tools for stocks and QCD gifts, then you're getting all the info on the donor beforehand, right? Yes, the answer is yes. So we sort of designed these all in order to make sure that you're avoiding this information, you're cutting it off before it happens. Claire asks, might this deter people from giving, meaning asking for information? We've seen no evidence of this. In fact, it's likely to result in much larger gifts. What we do know is that being unthanked after a major gift does deter people from making second gifts. And so if you're worried about sort of scaring off donors, it's much more likely that not acknowledging a really big gift is going to keep people from making donations as opposed to entering some basic information as well. Susan asks, by the way, how would you advise an organization that does not publicly acknowledge donors, providing anonymity in essence? Well, the anonymity is, there's two different components here. One is, does this get published widely? And for some organizations, they don't publish any of their donors, either because they're more controversial or more political, or I know that Stanford actually tends to shy away from this for the most part because they don't want someone else just sort of going down the list of donors and calling everybody. Now, acknowledging them to them, meaning the organization thanks them, is a different level of things. And so you need to know internally who's giving, even if you're not putting that out in the world. So different frame here. There's no necessity, by the way, to sort of publish this as well. All right, other questions. Patricia asks, it would be interesting to see which wording to capture donor information did not work in that set of experiments that I told you about. So I told you we ran 7 experiments, they barely moved the needle, and then we had this big breakthrough. I don't have it all top of mind or on hand. A couple of things that stood out. I remember we said, 80% of or most other people share information, you should too. And we thought that social proof would work, and it didn't. So that's my one example that comes to mind as well. Asking donors to notify you so you can plan better seems morbid. Like, are we planning for you to die? How do you communicate that in a softer way? That's from Tatum. Great question, Tatum. The language that we sort of often will talk about is, donors from 18 to 88 have included us in their will, and making sure that we can sort of account for this and celebrate them is really valuable. So as you talk about this, talk about the range of donors, the sort of the range of donors that are making these kinds of gifts, and that will avoid the feeling of being targeted as an 80, 90-year-old, et cetera. So that sort of scope actually really softens it as you think about that information. This is a good question. Is referring to donors by first name generational? We tend to address communications to Mr. and Mrs. So the, calling yourself sort of Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith will still trigger the same feeling. So I don't think there's a universal best practice here. It depends on the sort of culture and community that you're in and how that feels. So the point is more to make sure you're using their name, even if you're using an honorific in their last name, than that you must use their first name. Now, some communities, the first name will be very common, and so you'll make a call there based on the sort of age, generation, culture you're in as well. In your experience, do handwritten thank you notes, or thinking of you notes, work as well? Chris, they can. One of the things that is a knock against handwritten notes, the case for is that they'll always be opened, right? And they will be appreciated. The case against them is they feel a little bit less spontaneous, frankly, than like a quick email or a quick text message, which actually feels more how you might relate to a friend. And so it builds a stronger relationship because it models after a sort of more closer relationship. The other thing is like, this is up to you. Will you actually do it? So if you think, boy, I would actually send 30 emails a week and I could get those out because I copy and paste and reuse some of it versus 30 handwritten notes. I mean, I just don't have very good handwriting. And so if I was an MGO, I'd probably say, oh, that might be useful. I'm going to do it. And then I'd buy a bunch of cards and most of them would stay on the desk for a year. So if you feel like, yes, I could actually do it and I will execute on that, great. But for most people, texting and emails will actually happen with greater frequency. And the most important stuff is the stuff you actually do. So this is really important. All right, let's do one more question, then we'll give everyone a little bit of time before they wrap up. So Hillary says, I really struggle with thank you calls. They feel so awkward. Any tips on how to manage them so they go well and lead to meaningful personal connections? P.S. I'm a millennial, so it's probably part of my problem with the phone. Yeah, phone calls are awkward, right? Especially when you're catching somebody off guard and you may not know them. So one, I would say do it and just practice and practice. But a quick model is saying, Mrs. Smith or Dorothy, or after we decide if we're on first name basis or not, say, hey, this is Hillary. I'm actually calling from the land trust, and I hope you have 90 seconds so I can say thank you. Are you too busy right now? And they say, we just got this gift. We're so excited. You're such a generous person. And then sort of open up for any questions that, that they have. But I have a friend who used to do a lot of public speaking and would say, the audience is always going to be 80% as excited as you are. And so you being extra excited on the phone, knowing that it might be awkward, that you've got to raise the bar and raise the sort of warmth, because otherwise, it's going to be sort of cold. So if you're cold, they're going to be twice as cold. If you're warm, they're going to be a little bit warm. And so thinking about that as well. But it's also okay to feel awkward. Just own it. So go from there. All right. So we have another 24 questions, and we're not going to answer them because we're going to pause here and give everyone 10 minutes back. And I just want to say a really, really big thank you for making the time here. I know that this year is sort of wildly complex, and that that you're doing so much work to sort of foster these strong relationships with a lot of people. And for most people, you are the vessel for them to actually do good in the world, right? That them being able to connect with you, generate giving to your organization, through your work that then goes out into the world, is the thing that actually accesses all this impact for them. And so that's really important. And I know you're dealing with this on top of a whole bunch of other random stuff in your life that has nothing to do with your job. And so I appreciate you doing all of that. And then on top of it, taking an hour to really stretch yourself and learn some new things and try on some new ways of thinking that might not be as familiar. So a lot of bravery, a lot of thoughtfulness from you all, and just a really, really big thank you as well. So let's see. I think before we go, I'm going to get yelled at if I don't give announcements. The next thing we're doing, next session is actually on May 18th. We're going to talk about how women give and some of the different trends we're seeing across gender in a variety of ways. And so that will be really interesting. Some really cool research has already gone into there. And so that will be in 2 weeks. So nothing next week. But if you'd like to join that, check us out. We're doing a ton of research. We've got a really great team thinking about this as well. So really loved spending time with you all today. I'm going to go back to work. I hope you guys all get a good break and talk to you all pretty soon.